Greetings everyone, Brett here with Hammerhead Model Making, back with another full build video. Today we're going to be looking at the Airfix Phantom FG.1 in 1/72 scale. I built this kit as part of a mini group build back in December of 2023. It was affectionately known as the Advent build, and the concept behind this is you start a build on December 1st, and you have to have it done before Christmas Day, December 24th. So I had 24 days to build this kit. And initially I was really looking forward to this. I think the Fleet Air Arm Phantoms are just amazing looking in that dark sea gray scheme over white. And just happened to be able to locate one of these kits at my local hobby shop. And so I set about getting this one started. And it was difficult for me to not compare this kit to the Academy F4 Phantom, which they came out roughly the same time, and they both have their ups and downs. And now, granted, these are two very different versions of the Phantom. The British Phantom having different engines, different details from the American Phantoms, but nevertheless, it was always in my mind comparing the two. However, just like pretty much every other aircraft kit, we start in the cockpit. One of the things I really did like about this kit, especially in the cockpit, was the ejection seats. They were fairly detailed, and they had molded on belts and harnesses, which you usually don't get in 1/72 scale. And I appreciate that, because it just means you just don't have to buy aftermarket harnesses for them. Or, I mean, you could go the aftermarket route and get a much more detailed ejection seat, especially whereas the Airfix kit allows you to have the canopies open. The Academy kit does not. But that said, out of the box, it's not bad. You also do get pretty close to full-length intakes, so that is another nice thing here. So at this point, construction went really fast. There really wasn't a lot to actually build for the interior, so we can really jump ahead to painting. Primed everything in black, and then we were starting to hit everything with the dark gold gray for the cockpit interior colors. And additionally, at this time, I decided to also paint the interiors of the intakes, just because it just made sense to get this done. So I'm just using the Vallejo flat white here. This is fairly thinned. I'd say about 20% thinner. Really helps you get a nice smooth coat, but it does make the white paint somewhat translucent, so you will have to use a few coats to get a good, to build up a nice good coat there. Moving on to detail stuff in the cockpit, just using various colors, mainly black, to pick out instruments and various other things that needed to be painted. The raised detail around the cockpit is pretty good, except for the fact that none of the instruments or controls or anything are raised detail. It's all you're left to rely on decals and flat surfaces. So that's kind of a bummer. For those of you that don't like using decals, just be aware that there is no instrument detail. It's all just flat and smooth. So if you don't want to use decals, you will have to go the route of photo etch or 3D decals if they have them for this kit. So at this point, with all the detail painting done, I can go ahead and get everything coated in gloss coat. This will just help protect everything. Decided to do the intakes at the same time. They will stay gloss. Usually the insides of the intakes were a glossy white anyway, so it just worked out. But the gloss coat for the cockpit will help us protect our paintwork during the next stages of weathering. So for weathering, I am using the Flory Dark Dirt Wash in here, just to add a little layer of grime and to kind of create some artificial shadow in there, just to create some depth. So the whole cockpit gets covered in the Flory Wash, and I've really enjoyed using the Flory Wash on my last few builds. It's really easy to use. It's really easy to clean up. Just a little, here we're just using a little cotton bud with just has some water on it to clean that off. Now we can move on to decals. So the decals were okay. They're really just basically two color, black and white. So not the best, but at least they fit well and they settle down well. They just don't necessarily look the greatest. Would have been nice to have a little bit more color, various buttons and switches, especially because you don't get any of that raised detail, but It is what it is. So moving on, we can matte coat everything. This seals in all of our weathering as well as our decals and takes away that shine. And just make sure we get everything nice and, good solid coat over everything. That will be going inside. So now we can start assembling the actual cockpit in preparation to get it installed into the fuselage. The seats, you'll see here in this little sped up video clip that I kind of had some trouble getting the seats to sit in correctly, and I'm not 100% sure if that was just user error or I was doing it wrong or what, but they actually pop out a couple times here during this process, but eventually I do figure it out. I promise I'm not totally incompetent, but sometimes I can get ahead of myself when I'm working, and I just get excited, like, okay, I can finally get the cockpit all put together, just throw it in there, not really necessarily paying attention. But we do get there in the end, and like I said, you can see I just kind of fumbled all those parts out. But ultimately, I get it together, and we are able to move forward. I mean, all in all, out of the box, the cockpit doesn't look horrible. It just doesn't also look great. Here we can get the intakes together. So these just snap together. There are large locating pins, so there's no messing it up. And so I also went ahead and masked the inside there, and I'm putting some foam in there to protect it during the painting process later. I find it easier to do it now than when it's already installed in the aircraft. So just one of those things that I've learned, that it's just easier to do it ahead of time. And now we can start getting the cockpit installed into the fuselage. Again, the locating tabs here are pretty decent, so it's really hard to mess things up there. You'll notice at the very top of the intakes there, I've already done a little bit of sanding. There was a pretty big gap on the top there and the bottom that required filler and sanding. I mean, pretty extensively, and I ended up, after the priming stage, I had to do a little bit more because there are still some ghost seams there. So just the overall fit of the kit was average, I would say. So at this point now we can move on to getting all the fuselage together. One of the things this kit does really well is it gives you lots of different options for how you want to assemble your kit. You can do in-flight, you can do it all, folded up and closed, or you can do it ready to launch on the catapult. There's different options. You do have to pay attention during the build to make sure you're using the right combination of parts. For example, those little inserts I put into the tail, there's different versions depending on what angle you want the horizontal stabilizers to be at. So just be aware that there are multiple options in this kit, and you will need to kind of decide which version of the kit you're going to be doing. In concept, another nice part about this kit is having the spine be a separate part. This avoids, having to do some unsightly sanding along the top of the jet, which is, let's be honest, the F4 has a pretty prominent spine like that. However, the overall fit of this spine piece, again, it was just pretty average, like large gaps, and I really had to tape the fuselage together to force it together in order to get those to fit, or that part to fit. So just heads up, be aware. At this point, we can put in the first stage compressors. It is interesting that they are combined, because it means you have to kind of flex the intakes in there to get that part to fit. I think in hindsight, I would actually snip that part in half and just install each one individually. But here's the exhaust trunks as well going in. This is also another just a single solid part. In order to have pylons on the other side of the aircraft, you will have to drill out holes to accept the pylons. And so that's for the weapons pylons. So these are the inboard pylons. And then for the drop tanks that go on the outboard pylons, you have to cut out this weird rectangle cutout. And it's just really strange that was the choice they went, because if you don't cut it square, your drop tanks can end up slightly skewed, and it ends up being noticeable. So you have that lower wing insert part going on to the main lower wing and the body part, and then this all gets fit together. And again, very large gaps in the fuselage. that required a fair amount of filler and sanding to get those to disappear, which also means you have to do rescribing. So here's those little cutouts I was telling you about for the drop tanks. It just seems like it was a weird way to do it. And why not use like the two, drill out the two holes kind of a thing like you do for the inboard pylon. Maybe there just wasn't enough plastic here for it to seat into. I don't know. Just it seems like a strange choice. So now we can get upper part of the wing on. And I think the overall theme of this kit was just Airfix was very ambitious with this kit in that you really do have a lot of options. You can have your wings folded, wings not folded, flaps up, flaps down. All of the control surfaces are separate. You have little ports that can be opened for the engines or closed. You can do landing gear up or down, slats up or down. Different configurations for the nose landing gear, whether it's launching or stationary. Just lots of options, but none of the options really fit well. You can see her just to get the slat on in a neutral position required a lot of trimming and test fitting to get that even close to fit flush. So it's unfortunate that as ambitious as Airfix was with this kit, the execution just didn't quite make it to the execution. And it just leaves a lot of places, gaps, and large panel lines that it just leaves something to be desired. So just be aware of that. I mean, with work, you could really make this kit shine, but it does require work. So you got like for example here, like putting on the outboard wing portion, it's just basically a butt joint. I mean, there was no locating pins for that to fit into, so you could easily get that installed, set it aside, and it could slip a little bit or whatever, and you could have a terrible misalignment. So it is what it is. And unfortunately, there aren't very many options for British Phantoms in 1/72nd scale. So here, for example, the nose landing gear. In order to do the non-launch version, you have to cut down the launch version and install a separate part. And that just seems overly complicated and unnecessary to me. I mean, I don't make models, I don't design them, I don't do the CAD work. So for me to say like, oh, why couldn't they just make two different nose gear pieces? Maybe that it was prohibitively expensive, but it just seems like it would have been a better option. Especially, I mean, I'm trying to imagine like a more inexperienced builder trying to do this and potentially running into problems. So for the painting process, I'm going to use the closed canopy version. You do get two separate sets of canopies, one that's closed and then one set that's open. I'm using the closed set to essentially mask off the cockpit during the painting process. And then additionally, I primed this one all in gray instead of white, or instead of black, because there was going to be a lot of white on this aircraft, and I wasn't going to be going super dirty or weathered on this, so I wanted a nice light base to paint the white down on. And so for this, I'm using Tamiya white mixed with their X20 thinner. It's probably about 20% thinner to paint, maybe like 25% thinner to paint, and it sprays on beautifully. And it's a great general purpose white color, especially for doing larger parts like this. So go ahead and give all of the underside a coat of white. That's part of the paint scheme. But then additionally, there are areas where I'm going to be painting on the markings, so I also need to base coat those in white. One of the things that I really wanted to do with this kit was to really practice painting markings. And if you've seen my last video on the Avenger, I did do some markings on that as well, but unfortunately the video didn't work out so great, so you didn't get to see a lot of it. This one I was good about getting everything recorded, and I wanted to do pretty much all of the main markings painted on this one, really leaving only the stencils to the decals. So kitmask.com kindly sent me out a set of masks for the markings on this. So this is for 007 of the Fleet Air Arm, and I mean, what's more iconic on a British jet than 007? at least for the perception of an American. That's pretty awesome. So using some transfer tape, we are able to lift off the painting mask, and we are able to lay it down on to the surface of our model. In this particular instance, it is the tail. Now, there are going to be multiple layers to these masking jobs. So what I'm doing here is using the entire mask to align everything, but I'm actually going to be removing a fair amount of that mask because I only want a certain part that's going to be white, but I needed the whole thing on there in order to properly align everything. So there we go. So we pulled off the transfer tape, and now we can get rid of, I have multiple copies of this, so I'm just going to discard these parts here that I won't need. The vinyl masking material did need a little bit of trimming, but not too bad. And here we can get another portion of our masking installed. So Kit Mask was kind enough to get these made up and sent out to me for this build, and I'm really grateful because this gave me a lot of great experience for painting markings, and especially on a smaller scale like 172. I was a little intimidated by that, but it all worked out. So here you can see a couple other places where I've added more of those masks. And now we're going to go ahead and paint the roundels. So starting with the blue outer band, we're going to get that painted up. Nice solid coat on there. So this is the Tamiya blue. And you'll notice during this process that I actually don't paint the roundels on the upper surfaces of the wings. That's because they're on the folded part of the wing that faces inboard. And I just kind of determined that was going to be too tricky for my skill level to get in there and get those painted correctly and aligned correctly. So I ended up using decals for the upper surface roundels. But for everything else, I used the masking. So now we can get the center portion painted. Now that the blue part was done and masked over, this is fairly simple. Again, we're just using some Tamiya color here. Get that painted on. And I did do paint masking like this on a Spitfire previously, so that was kind of good experience for this one, even though that one was at a much larger scale, but it really helped me out for that. And here we can do markings for the tail. These British Phantoms had some really striking tail art, and that was really kind of what drew me to this kit to begin with, was the striking tail art, and the 007, of course, and the dark sea gray. Pretty much everything about this this aircraft drew me to it. So I can now remove the masking for the underside. I won't be doing any more painting on the underside, so I can remove all the masking here and just check my work and see how it looks. So we can get that center ring pulled up, and perfect. Really, really pleased with how that looked. The kit mask set also came with a mask for the little walkway area on the wing. So we're going to get some yellow down, and then we'll get it's a very tiny strip of masking that goes on there, but it's worth it in the end. So now we can reapply the remainder of the mask to the tail. This will cover the red and protect it during when we go to paint the main body color. So again, we're using that transfer tape, lining it up with what's already on there, and then we can get it pressed down and remove the transfer tape. And the transfer tape is designed not to be super sticky, so that the mask will stick to the model and not the tape. Sometimes you do kind of have to help it along, but overall it's not too painful of a process. A little time consuming, but not terribly difficult. And yeah, so just make sure we get that all painted down. So now moving on to the main body color, I decided to use Mr. Color Dark Sea Gray. All the paints that I looked at, this was the one that to me looked the most accurate, and I'm happy I picked this one. I think it really turned out really well. And I don't normally use lacquer paints just because my extraction system, because my studio is inside the house, the lacquer smell is pretty strong. But I made sure to have my extraction going, extra fans going, and ventilation just to make sure we could get all that smell out. But it was definitely worth it because this color went down great and looks good in the end. Really, really pleased with it. So now we can do the main body color. I do love that the main body color wraps around onto the bottom. I know it's kind of weird, but I think it just looks really good. And I wish more U.S. aircraft would have used that, but it did make it a little kind of a more pain to mask, but not too bad in the end. So here we can see removing all this masking. So this was very satisfying. I'd done a lot of masking on this aircraft, and I was really anxious to be able to get all this masking off and see how it all turned out. And so you can see here, it takes a little time, but working your way through it. And I think what's important is really taking your time to do a good job on the masking. Just like in any other like paint preparation stage, making sure you get your masking down good is just very rewarding and very satisfying. And I had only just a few tiny areas of overspray on this, so I think I lucked out pretty good on the overall paint work on here. And it's not a terribly complex paint scheme, but it's not super easy either. So just really pleased. So now we can start getting some of these markings pulled up and see how they turned out, and get the 007 unveiled here. So really pleased with how these kit masks worked, and they performed flawlessly. What can I say? I've yet to have a real issue with their product so far. So unmasking the Royal Navy part here was just, I'm just going to let this one sit in silence for a minute, because this was very satisfying. Like, even just rewatching it now as I'm recording the audio for this, I remember just being like, man, this is very satisfying. So here's that walkway. So there we go. Very pleased with that. There is still more masking and painting to do, but that was kind of the first layer of it. So now we're going to start doing some black painting here. So we'll get the radome painted, and then we have the large registration numbers on the underside of the aircraft. Again, just the way that the registration numbers are painted on the underside, in conjunction with the white surface and the gray surface, really stands out. I really like the look of it, and but just wait until we get the tail unmasked, because that was also very satisfying. So again, careful masking here will pay you back in dividends with some very nice, crisp paintwork. And again, this really helped me to feel much more confident about masking and spraying markings, because it's definitely something I want to do more of in my builds. And so if I can do it on a 1/72nd scale jet, then doing it in 1/48th or even 1/32nd, because I have a few projects coming up that I'm going to be doing that with, isn't nearly as daunting. So now we can finally remove the masking on the tail here. And this is the one that I was really excited about. And I definitely need some new tweezers here that can bite better into those little bits of masking. But I definitely like this squadron symbol. It's the red, the white, the black, the gray. It all just works. So whoever their artist was, my hat's off to you, sir. You do have to be careful removing the masking, because you don't want to scratch your paint. So I'm really trying to walk a fine line there between, getting under the mask, but not scratching the paint. And for the most part, I do a pretty good job. There are a few places I do touch up, but overall, very happy. So another iconic thing with the Phantom is the engine exhaust area, and that has a lot of bare metal. And so, and another unique feature to the exhaust on the Phantom is this very weathered and paneled look on those parts just behind the engine nozzles. And so I wanted to try a couple of techniques here just to kind of test things out a little bit. So you'll see here, I painted aluminum first, and now I'm going to go in with a steel color. And I cut out little strips of masking tape to lay along the panels of just behind the engine, and to kind of create this striped effect. You'll see it in just a second here, and I think it works pretty good. There's also separate panels on the horizontal stabilizers that get picked out in the darker steel color. So here's those little strips I was telling you about, and just going to lay down the steel color, kind of misting it on at first, but eventually go a little bit heavier on there. But the goal here is to kind of create this striped paneled effect on these parts. If you look at pictures of the Phantom, you'll know what I'm trying to go for here. I didn't go all out with like the heat distressing, like showing all the different hues, the blues and the purples and stuff that you can get in there, but at this scale I was pretty happy with the effect that I was going for. So getting those little strips of paint tape removed, and here we go, all the metallic work. So I was happy. I thought it turned out pretty good, and kind of creates a cool focal point there and some variation in all that metallic color. So pretty pleased with it. Moving on, I wasn't going to go super heavy on the weathering with this aircraft. From the pictures that I saw, they were well maintained and clean. So really my weathering is going to be limited to a panel wash and then some light oils on the underside. So in order to start all that, excuse me, I need to give everything a nice good gloss coat, because I will have to add stencils to this aircraft. Here you go. I didn't bother filming the stencils. It's terribly boring, but if you're familiar at all with the Phantoms, you'll know that McDonnell Douglas they went to town with the stencils. There's so many stencils. I think it took me 2 or 3 evenings to get all the stencils on. I didn't even put them all on. I didn't put a lot on the top just because like a lot of the black stencils really just blended in with the dark gray and you really couldn't see them. So, but once they're on there, we do need another coat of gloss to seal in the decals prior to our panel wash. And again, we're using the Flory Dark Dirt Wash. So we just apply this liberally all over the aircraft. And I mean, you could try and be more careful and just, apply it like a pin wash, just trying to get into the recesses. But the Flory wash is pretty forgiving, and I haven't noticed any adverse effects with just slapping it on. It's definitely faster to go this way. So we're doing both top and bottom with the same color. Once it's dry, you just remove it with a damp cloth, and it just wipes right off that gloss coat. So if you were doing this over like a matte coat or a satin coat, it'd be a little bit harder to remove, but over the gloss coat, it really comes right off. For the harder to reach places, you can just use a cotton bud, Q-tip, whatever you call it locally. And yeah, I really like it. I need to order more because I'm almost out now at this point, but I'm really liking it. So now we can hit everything with a matte coat. So this will seal in our panel wash and knock back that shine, and will allow us to start working with some oils here. So I did try to avoid getting the matte coat over the metallic areas. I still wanted to maintain some shine on those metallics, but at this point with the matte coat down, I can pop off the canopy, since I won't be doing any more, overall airbrushing on the aircraft, and kind of start putting some stuff together. So we're going to get the engine nozzles installed. And I got to say, the one thing I don't like about the British Phantoms, I don't like their engines. The engine nozzles they don't do it for me. That's my only gripe about the look of the British Phantoms. Other than that, they're awesome. So here we have the multi-part canopy that we are going to use to display it open. This is one benefit the Airfix kit does have over the Academy kit, because the Academy kit, you only get a closed canopy and that's it. You could go through the trouble of cutting it open to do open cockpit, but it's kind of a pain. Moving on to oils, we're just going to do some light oil staining on the underside of the engines, just where fluids would leak, grease, oil, fuel, whatever these engines leak. And if you've seen a lot of my previous videos on doing oil work, I'm just doing the same process. So this is going to be pretty sped up, just because it'll be a repeat of what I've done before. Pretty straightforward. Just applying little dots of it, and then with a thinned out or a brush with thinner, you pull it back and streak it back. So Nothing terribly complicated, nothing necessarily overly done, but enough to show that it's being used. And then additionally, I'm going to kind of dry brush on some of this black oil paint just to add a little bit of a soot effect to the area behind the engine exhaust. So just a little bit of black and brown in there. So with all that done and dried, we can start putting all of the final components together. The kit does come with weight on wheels, so you do get a nice little flat spot. So just be careful while you're installing those to make sure that you get them all properly lined up so that it sits flat. The kit does come with full set of ordnance. You get air to ground and rockets. You get bombs, rockets, sidewinders, sparrows. You get the whole works. But I wanted to display this one, you know, like it was on its way up or down on a catapult. And so I opted for no ordnance on this. And that's kind of unusual for me. I normally love putting as much ordnance as physically possible on my aircraft, but I don't know. It just kind of worked for this one to have it somewhat clean. So here we get the inboard pylons on. So this would normally carry your AIM-9s and then either the rocket pods or the iron bombs. Centerline fuel tank going on, and there you can also see on the bottom of the fuselage the recesses for the sparrows. The outboard drop tanks going on. So this is what I was telling you, that if you don't get the cutouts done just right, your drop tanks might be a little screwy, and I had to make adjustments to get those to fit on there. Canopy parts going on. Overall, these look pretty good. No real complaints here. Getting them fit on was a little tricky, but it is what it is. All right, so now we can move on to the diorama base. So I had specifically in mind, I wanted to show this on one of the elevator lifts on the British carrier, and they had a very specific shape to their elevator lifts, and so I looked around to see if I could find a wooden plaque that would approximate the shape and size. Really couldn't find any, so I decided to design one and print it out on my 3D printer. So the overall print took about 12 hours, not too bad. And I wasn't necessarily worried on like the fit and finish of it. I just really needed a starting base to build the diorama base. So here I'm just adding super glue, and I'm going to laminate some very thin plastic card on top of it to act as my actual paintable surface on the top there, because I didn't want all the the layer lines visible in the final product. So get that installed on. Once it dries, we can cut it out. Like I said, this is really thin plastic and cuts easily with a nice sharp pair of scissors. So this is just kind of a rough cut, just to kind of get off the bulk of the material. And then I come back in with a knife to really clean up that edge. You can see there the bottom of my print there it's kind of wonky. I don't have the best 3D printer, but it kind of gets me started on where I need to go. So here we're just going to trim off the excess plastic so that it matches up with the outer edge of the diorama base. And again, so just prefaced for the diorama base, it's not going to be perfectly to scale to what it should be. I made it a little smaller than it should be, and that's really just because of the size limitations of my printer itself. I wasn't able to print it any bigger, but it should be a little bit bigger because the Phantom should be able to fit on the elevator just barely with the nose folded back. In fact, that's one of the options in the kit, is to be able to have the nose folded back. I didn't want that, so the nose is in the normal position, but just be aware that this base will be slightly smaller than it should be. You'll see that the jet overhangs a little bit on either side. And in reality, that wouldn't have been the case, because then it wouldn't have been, because the British lift is in roughly the middle of the deck. It's not like out on the outer edges, like on an American carrier where the jets can kind of hang over the side. So the jet needed to be able to fit completely within the footprint of the elevator. So went ahead and primed it black, and now we're just going to do a little bit of white basing. And as part of the weathering process for this, then we're going to hit it with some NATO black. This is going to be very highly thinned, and just because I wanted to be able to control how much of that, pre-shading came through. And so I can apply on as much as I want so that I get just the right level of opacity. And then I also additionally planned on doing additionally weathering on top of it. So, and I apologize if there's sound in the background. They're doing construction over the neighbors, so I apologize if you're hearing that. So at this point now, we're just gonna start doing the actual markings on the surface of the elevator here. So this is gonna be kind of a two-part thing. I've got these lines here that I wanted to mask, and then this kind of outer ring around the outer edge of the elevator to paint, and it ended up being easier to paint those separately. And I ended up having this weird reaction. You can kind of see in the upper corner there where the paint kind of cracked, and I'm not quite sure why it did it, but I just kind of worked it into the weathering process. So here I'm just loading this thing up with oils and splotching it and blending it in different ways, just to kind of create some cool color variation between blacks and browns. And eventually I'll start adding some white in there as well. And this just helps, kind of give it a dirty look, used look, without necessarily going like super dirty. And I know that's kind of like an arbitrary thing to say, but I do a lot of this weathering just kind of by feel, like, okay, what looks right, what feels right to me as I'm doing it. So that's just kind of the best way I can describe it. So at this point, once the oils have dried, I'm going to do a little bit of dry brushing to add some like tire marks and kind of streaks on it. I do this differently than the wet oil. I just helps give a different effect, and kind of creates just like kind of a sooty effect, even though it's not necessarily what the actual weathering would be. I just kind of like how it looks. I had originally recorded painting the figures that I was going to use for this, but it was just painting a lot of black and dry brushing grays over it. It just didn't look good. But I just wanted to show that I'm using a little bit of this clear UV resin to do the sailor's goggles. So kind of a fun little detail, especially in 1/72 scale. But now we can get our guys on here, and I joke with myself afterwards that figure that I just put on is posing for the most epic album cover of the century. That stoic crossed arm look. But anyways, here we go. Final result. So I built the aircraft and the base and the figures in 23 days. I finished with 1 day to spare, and it was a lot of fun. The kit is average. I mean, if you want to build a British Phantom in 1/72 scale, pretty much your only option. But you do have to work for it a little bit. And but what this kit really made me want to do is build one in 1/48 scale and really do a proper weathering job on it, detail and everything. I think it'd be a lot of fun to do. But in the end, I was still pretty pleased with it. It was fun. I had a lot of fun doing this group build with a great group of modelers, and it's kind of a change up to be able to have to build a model like this to a deadline, and kind of makes you have to rethink some of your processes and strategies in order to work. So it was fun. It was a challenge. Glad I did it, and but I'm glad it's done now. So thank you to Kit Mask for sending out the masking for all of the markings on this. They worked great, and it was a lot of fun to paint the markings on this and to get that practice. I also need to give a huge shout out to my Patreons for helping support this channel. I really appreciate that. If you are interested in helping support the work that I do, consider becoming a patron. Links are down below. Additionally, if you're not subscribed, I'd hope you'd consider subscribing, because that even helps. And if you like the video, give it a thumbs up. Let me know what you think down in the comments. I do like to hear from you. I like to interact with you, so please leave me a comment, even if it's just to say hi. I'll say hi back, and we will see you on the next video.